The low, resonant growl of Leonardo Dicaprio's motorcycle disrupted the stillness of the deserted parking lot. He turned off the engine, but before dismounting, something caught his eye that made him hesitate. An older man, moving slowly with visible exhaustion etched across his face, was struggling to maneuver a long row of shopping carts that seemed far too unwieldy for him to manage. Leonardo observed for a moment, before making a decision. What happened next would not only alter the course of the elderly man's day, but leave an indelible mark on your heart as well. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're tuning in from. If you enjoy heartfelt tales like this one, don't forget to follow along, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story to share with you. The gentle morning sunlight seeped through the frayed curtains of Earl's modest home, casting a soft glow across the room. He got up slowly, feeling the burden of another long day pressing down on him. Each movement was met with the protest of his aching back, but, as he did every morning, he pushed through the pain. He needed to stay strong, for Margaret, his beloved wife, who still lay peacefully asleep in the next room. The kitchen, though humble, radiated a sense of warmth and familiarity. The walls were adorned with cherished photographs, a smiling wedding portrait, a snapshot from a 1970s beach trip, and a family gathering during Christmas. Earl paused briefly in front of the images, his gaze lingering. Where did those days go, he wondered, absently twisting the wedding band on his finger. After brewing a simple cup of coffee, Earl made his way to Margaret's room. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring vacantly at the wall. Alzheimer's had stolen so much from her, but Earl still caught glimpses of the woman he had always loved in the flicker of her eyes. Kneeling beside her, he gently took her hand. "Good morning, my love," he said softly. Margaret didn't respond, but a faint smile flickered across her lips. For Earl, that fleeting expression was more than enough. He carefully helped her up, guiding her first to the bathroom and then to her seat at the kitchen table. While Margaret settled, Earl began the familiar routine of sorting her medications. Each pill felt like a tangible reminder of the daily battles they faced together. "Today is going to be a good day, sweetheart," he whispered, almost as if trying to convince himself. In the living room, the reality of their struggles awaited him. On the table sat a growing pile of bills, most stamped with ominous overdue notices. Earl sighed deeply, picking up one envelope and scanning the figures with weary eyes. "Maybe I can squeeze in a few extra hours at the market," he murmured, searching for a sliver of optimism amidst the mounting pressures. Before leaving, Earl returned to Margaret's room to say goodbye. She was holding their wedding photo, as she often did, her fingers tracing the faces in the frame. Gently stroking her silver hair, Earl whispered, "I'll be back soon. Stay well, my love." Margaret didn't speak, but he caught a faint spark of recognition in her eyes. Closing the door softly behind him, Earl paused to glance at the sky, now illuminated by the first golden hues of sunrise. He drew in a deep breath, steeling himself for the day ahead. With a quiet resolve, he murmured, "Just give me the strength to make it through one more day." Little did he know, this day would bring something extraordinary that would change his life forever. When Earl arrived at the market, the parking lot was already alive with activity. He stepped out of his car, a battered old sedan that, much like its owner, showed the unmistakable signs of age. His knees protested as he climbed out, but he ignored the discomfort, retrieving his faded work vest from the back seat. The fabric, worn thin in places, bore the marks of countless years of use, but Earl donned it with the quiet pride and dignity he carried with him every day. Another day, Earl muttered under his breath as he trudged over to the scattered shopping carts, left in disarray across the lot. The crisp morning air was a small mercy, though he knew it wouldn't last long. Before long, the summer sun would beat down on the pavement, turning his already arduous task into something even more draining. With practiced precision, Earl got to work, methodically organizing the carts into neat, orderly rows. He pushed them carefully, keeping a sharp eye out to make sure none of them veered out of control. The repetitive motion sent a dull, persistent ache through his knee. But he didn't stop. Every wasted moment only added more pressure, and he didn't want to give the manager any reason to complain. Taking a brief moment to wipe the sweat from his brow, Earl glanced around. The parking lot was packed, bustling with cars and hurried shoppers darting in and out of the store. A young man pushed a cart past him in a rush, nearly colliding with Earl. "Sorry, sir," the man called over his shoulder as he disappeared into the store. "Sir," Earl repeated quietly, with a wry smile tugging at his lips. He knew his age showed, but being addressed like that never failed to remind him just how quickly time was catching up to him. As Earl lined up another row of carts, a sharp voice cut through the clamour of the lot. "Earl, what's going on here? Why are these carts still scattered everywhere?" The voice belonged to the manager, a man in his 30s with a perpetually impatient demeanour. Earl straightened up as best he could, ignoring the sharp protest from his knee. He replied in his usual calm tone, "I'm getting them in order, sir. Just need a few more minutes." The manager sneered, his voice laced with sarcasm. "A few more minutes? That's no excuse. If you were faster, we wouldn't need two people doing your job." Earl pressed his lips together, swallowing any retort that might worsen the situation. He knew arguing would only escalate things. Instead, he turned back to the carts, pushing them with renewed effort. The metallic clang of the wheels reverberated across the lot. Minutes later, as he was aligning the final row, one of the carts slipped loose and rolled toward a parked car. Earl, his reflexes not as quick as they once were, managed to grab it just in time. But the effort sent a sharp jolt of pain shooting through his knee, and he leaned against the cart to steady himself. "Just one more day, Earl," he murmured softly, closing his eyes for a moment. "Just one more day." Looking up at the sky, he whispered a quiet prayer. He didn't ask for a miracle or anything grand, just the strength to get through another day. "Help me, God. Just get me through this one," he said under his breath, a note of resignation in his voice. As Earl struggled to gather the remaining carts, he didn't realize that someone was watching him from across the lot. A man on a motorcycle had pulled into a quiet corner and was observing the scene intently. The man, clad in a sleek black jacket and sunglasses, removed his helmet and adjusted his shades as he leaned casually against his bike. His gaze remained fixed on Earl, his expression contemplative, as if deeply considering what he had just witnessed. Unaware of the stranger's presence, Earl carried on, oblivious to the fact that this man would soon play a pivotal role in his life. As Earl wrestled with the weight of another exhausting day, the low hum of the motorcycle's engine broke through the noise of the bustling parking lot. The machine was a classic model, its sound robust but subdued, almost as if it sought to announce its presence quietly. The rider, Leonardo Dicaprio, dismounted smoothly, removing his helmet and running a hand through his hair. He surveyed the scene with calm purpose, taking in every detail with a discerning eye. Leonardo wasn't there to pick up groceries, that much was clear. Something about this place, about what he had seen, had drawn him here. That's when his eyes landed on Earl, hunched over a row of carts, his every movement marked by visible strain. Leonardo noticed the way Earl paused every so often, clutching his knee as though the pain was unbearable, but still pushing through. His gaze shifted briefly to the manager, who now stood chatting idly with another employee, completely unaware or unconcerned about Earl's struggles. Frowning, Leonardo crossed his arms, a spark of determination flickering in his eyes. Without hesitation, Leonardo strode across the lot toward Earl. When he was close enough, he spoke, his voice steady and kind. "Need a hand with that?" Startled, Earl looked up, his eyes meeting those of the stranger. There was something familiar about the man, though Earl couldn't immediately place him. "No, no," Earl replied, a tired smile on his face. "I've got it under control. But thank you." Leonardo took a step closer, his gaze shifting to the dishevelled rows of carts. "I insist," he said, offering a small but sincere smile. Before Earl could object, Leonardo was already helping him push the row into place. "I appreciate it, but this is my job," Earl said, his tone firm but not unkind, as he tried to regain control of the task. Leonardo paused, looking at Earl with quiet conviction. "Sometimes, even the strongest people need a helping hand. Don't worry, I'm just here to lend mine." Something in Leonardo's tone reassured Earl, and after a moment's hesitation, he sighed and said, "Well, if you're that determined, you can start with those over there." He motioned to another scattered row of carts. With a nod, Leonardo got to work as if accepting a personal challenge. As they worked side by side, Leonardo struck up a conversation. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine interest. "A few years now," Earl replied. "Ever since my wife got sick. I needed the job to keep up with the bills. It's not easy, but it's what I've got." Leonardo listened intently, his empathetic gaze never wavering. Earl, perhaps finding comfort in the man's calm presence, continued to open up. He spoke of his wife, Margaret, the life they had shared, and how Alzheimer's had turned everything upside down. Leonardo asked questions, never intrusive, always thoughtful. It was clear he wanted to truly understand the weight Earl carried. After they had aligned a substantial number of carts, Leonardo suggested a break. "Let's grab something to drink. My treat." Earl hesitated, but the combination of thirst and fatigue convinced him to accept. Together, they walked to a small cafe inside the store, where Leonardo ordered 2 coffees. They sat on a bench outside, watching the ebb and flow of the busy parking lot. "Ever thought about retiring?" Leonardo asked, his tone casual but curious. Earl let out a bitter chuckle. "Retire? With what money? I sold just about everything I had to pay for Margaret's treatment. What's left barely covers the bills." Leonardo looked down at his coffee cup, silent for a moment. "You've done so much for her," he said finally, his voice filled with quiet admiration. Earl shrugged. "That's what any husband would do. And when you love someone, no matter what happens, you keep fighting." That simple, heartfelt sentiment lingered in Leonardo's mind. Earl wasn't looking for pity or praise. It was just the honest truth of a man devoted to the love of his life. Finishing his coffee, Leonardo looked at Earl, visibly moved. Though he couldn't explain it, he felt a deep, undeniable urge to do something for this man. It was as if fate had brought him here for a reason. "You're a strong man, Earl." "Stronger than most people I know," Leonardo said. Earl smiled faintly. "I don't know if it's strength. Might just be stubbornness." Leonardo chuckled softly but didn't lose his serious expression. He'd already made up his mind about what he needed to do, though he chose not to reveal it just yet. What Earl had shared about his life made Leonardo pause and reflect on everything he thought he understood about resilience and sacrifice. As they returned to the lot, Leonardo continued to ask questions, clearly wanting to keep the conversation going. Earl, for his part, decided to let it flow, sensing the man's genuine interest. As they pushed another row of carts, Leonardo asked, "So you mentioned your wife. How is she doing now?" Earl inhaled deeply before speaking. "Margaret, she's strong, stronger than I am, but Alzheimer's doesn't leave much room to breathe. Some days are better, some worse. Today was, it was just okay, I suppose." Leonardo hesitated for a moment before asking, And the treatment? You mentioned you've sold a lot of your things. How are you managing to keep up with it?" Earl paused, resting on one of the shopping carts. His eyes drifted toward the horizon, as though searching for the strength to respond. "I sold the house we built together. It was our home, full of memories, but I needed to pay for her initial treatments and medications. After that, the furniture went, then the car. Almost everything. I only kept what she absolutely needed." Leonardo stayed quiet, absorbing each word. Earl went on, sensing he finally had someone willing to listen. "This job here at the market doesn't pay much, but it's just enough to get by. The problem is her medication. It's so expensive and I can't afford to stop buying it." "And you?" Leonardo asked gently, his voice low but full of concern. "How are you taking care of yourself?" Earl managed a weary smile. "There's not much time or money left for that, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that she has everything she needs." Leonardo was silent, gripping the handle of the cart in front of him. He seemed to be processing everything Earl had shared. Finally he spoke. "Have you thought about asking for help? From friends, family?" Earl shook his head. "Most people have their own struggles to deal with. I can't expect them to shoulder mine as well. And to be honest, pride gets in the way. I've always believed in solving my own problems." Leonardo gave a faint smile, though a hint of sadness lingered in his eyes. You're not alone in thinking that. A lot of people feel the same way. But sometimes asking for help is the bravest thing you can do. After a pause, Leonardo placed a hand on Earl's shoulder, a brief but meaningful gesture. You're an admirable man, Earl. Even if you don't see it right now, the world needs people like you. You deserve some relief. Earl wasn't sure how to respond. There was something about Leonardo's sincerity that both disarmed him and brought an odd sense of comfort. I've made my decision, Earl said, as though trying to end the conversation. Margaret is my priority. She always will be. Leonardo nodded, respecting Earl's determination. Yet there was a flicker of resolve in his eyes, as if a plan was already forming in his mind. As the day went on, Leonardo stayed in the parking lot, helping Earl with the carts and quietly observing him. He noticed how Earl pushed through physical pain, endured the manager's sharp remarks without losing his composure, and carried himself with a quiet dignity despite everything. When Earl's shift finally ended, Leonardo shook his hand firmly. I hope we cross paths again, Earl. Earl gave a small smile. If you keep coming back here, I'm sure we will, Leonardo chuckled. You can count on that. As Earl walked away, burdened by the weight of the day, Leonardo lingered in the parking lot for a moment longer. He couldn't change Earl's past, but he felt a deep urge to do something about his future, and Margaret's too. Climbing onto his motorcycle and adjusting his helmet, Leonardo glanced once more at Earl, who was disappearing into the distance. He deserves more than this, Leonardo murmured to himself. In that instant, he made up his mind. He would do something Earl would never forget. That night, as Leonardo sat at home, his thoughts remained fixed on Earl's story. He realized how even the smallest gestures could make an immeasurable difference. While he couldn't fix everything in Earl's life, he could lighten part of the burden. The next morning, Leonardo returned to the market, this time with a clear plan in mind. He walked into the manager's office and asked for a private conversation. How can I help you? The manager asked, eyeing him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Leonardo, calm and composed, replied, I'm here to talk about Earl. The manager raised an eyebrow. Earl? What about him? He works hard every single day while carrying burdens most of us can't even imagine. I want to make sure he gets the support he needs. The manager looked puzzled. You want to help him? Why? Leonardo pulled out a check and placed it on the desk. I want to cover Earl's salary for the next few months. On top of that, I want him to have some days off to rest. But I'll need your cooperation to make sure this happens without him feeling uncomfortable. The manager stared at the check, stunned. That's generous, but he's a proud man. He probably won't accept it. Leonardo smiled faintly. I know. That's why this has to be anonymous. Just tell him it's a special bonus from the market. Can I count on you? After a moment of hesitation, the manager nodded. I think we can make this work. While still at the market, Leonardo went to the customer service desk and requested a list of nearby pharmacies. He wanted to ensure Margaret's treatment costs were also covered. A quick phone call to the pharmacy where Earl got her medications confirmed the details, and Leonardo arranged for the next several months' worth of bills to be paid. Before leaving, Leonardo stopped by a nearby cafe and picked up 2 coffees. Returning to the parking lot, he found Earl organising the last row of carts. Coffee? Leonardo offered, handing him one of the cups. Earl accepted it with a tired smile. You're a good man, you know that? Leonardo laughed lightly. I just like coffee. They sat together on the same bench as the day before. Leonardo looked at Earl with admiration. You're an inspiring man, Earl. Truly. Earl shook his head. I'm just doing what needs to be done. That's exactly what makes you special, Leonardo replied. Most people would have given up. You haven't. Earl shrugged. When you love someone, you stick by them. No matter what. Leonardo paused for a moment. If someone offered to help you, what would you say? Earl frowned. I'd tell them to help someone who really needs it. Leonardo smiled knowingly. You are that person, Earl, but never mind. Let's talk about something else.